The first time Silas Hardwick ever prayed out loud, he did it with a knife in his hand. Not at a church, not in a pew, not even with a Bible open. He stood barefoot on the cold pine boards of his bedroom, sweat shining on his upper lip like oil, and held a small hunting knife over the thick quilt as if he meant to carve something living out of it. His lips moved, and his words were a rasp. "Lord," he whispered, "give me a son." Across the room, Eliza Hardwick sat at her vanity with her brush paused mid-stroke, watching her husband's reflection in the mirror. For 7 years she'd watched him ask for the same thing with different masks. At the dinner table, he asked with laughter, big booming laughter that made the glassware jump, while he bragged that the Hardwick line would not end with him. On the gallery porch, he asked with charm, leaning on his cane and letting the overseer hear him say, "Soon as the boy's born, I'll put the deed in his hand." In bed, he asked with anger, gripping her wrists in the dark and hissing that if she did not do her duty, he would find a woman who could. Tonight, he asked with fear. The knife trembled slightly in his fist. Eliza set down her brush. The bristles left a soft dark curve against the vanity cloth, like a bruise. Silas's eyes were red-rimmed, and his hair had been slicked back too tight as if he were trying to hold his own thoughts in place. He wore his fine nightshirt, the one with the pearl buttons, but his hands looked like a field hand's, veined, calloused, impatient. "Eliza," he said without looking at her, "you understand what's at stake." "Your pride," she answered quietly. He flinched, as if pride were a fragile thing he might drop and break. "My father's name," Silas snapped, then lowered his voice. "The land, the house, the people. If I die without an heir, it goes to Gideon." At the name Gideon, Eliza's stomach tightened the way it always did, like a fist closing around her. Gideon Hardwick was Silas's cousin, a man with eyes like boiled glass, who smiled the way a fox might if it learned how to smile like a man. Gideon wrote letters every month that began with "dearest kin" and ended with "yours with the deepest concern," and every line between was a blade. Eliza had read them all. Silas liked to leave them on Eliza's desk as if she were the household's keeper of burdens. Gideon's concern was always the same: the lack of an heir, the frailty of the Hardwick line, the danger of outsiders sniffing around the estate, and Gideon's final sentence, repeated like a hymn, never changed. "If you do not produce a son, cousin, the law will do it for you." Silas lowered the knife onto the quilt with an odd gentleness, as if he were laying a sleeping child down. "I met with Dr. Pritchard today," he said. Eliza's fingers curled around the edge of the vanity. Dr. Pritchard had been coming to the plantation more often lately, and not for fevers or broken bones. He came with his black bag and his grave voice, and his habit of staring at Eliza's face too long, as if he expected to see the truth written there like a rash. "He says," Silas swallowed, "he says there may be an obstruction." Eliza turned her head slightly, the motion slow, like a woman turning toward thunder. "An obstruction," she repeated. Silas's voice rose with the humiliation of it. "He says my body has been strained by illness in my youth, that it may not take." Eliza stared at him through the mirror. Silas was a handsome man in the way money could sculpt a face. His jaw was clean cut, his nose straight, his shoulders broad. He was not unkind to look at, but something in him had always felt hollow, like a house built for show without a foundation. "And he told you this," Eliza said, "in front of your pride." Silas's mouth twisted. "He told me in front of your failure." The words landed between them like a dropped plate, sharp, loud, impossible to ignore. Eliza rose from the vanity so smoothly her skirts didn't rustle. Silas's chest heaved. "I will not be pitied," he said. "I will not be laughed at. Gideon will not take what is mine." "And what will you do," Eliza asked, "to prevent it?" Silas looked at her fully now. There was something desperate and bright in his eyes. "I will do what men do," he said. "What my father would do. What Gideon would do if he were in my place." Eliza waited. She had learned that men like Silas needed their words to echo back to them before they became real. Silas spoke the next part quickly, as if he feared the room itself might judge him. "I will purchase a breeding woman." Eliza's breath stopped. Silas's chin lifted with a perverse defiance. "A young one, strong hips, good teeth, no defects. If you cannot give me a son, I will make one." He said it the way a man might say he'd buy a new horse. Eliza's stomach turned, and for a moment she tasted iron at the back of her tongue. "A child," she said softly, "born into chains." Silas's eyes narrowed. "The boy would be mine, raised in the house, educated. He'd carry my name." "He'd carry your sin," Eliza said. Silas slammed his fist into the bedpost. "Do not preach to me. You've had 7 years to be righteous and fruitful, 7 years to do what every wife does, 7 years." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You will not shame me, Eliza. Not after what you cost me." Eliza's gaze flicked briefly to the locked drawer in her vanity where she kept the deed papers her father had left her. The plantation was named Hardwick, but part of its blood was hers. That was why Silas had married her. That was why Gideon circled like a vulture. She looked back at Silas. She thought of a young enslaved girl, bought and forced, her body turned into a battlefield for Silas's fear. Something in Eliza went cold. "No," she said. Silas blinked. "No, I won't allow it." Silas's face hardened. "You won't allow it?" His voice became a laugh that wasn't laughter. "Eliza, you forget what you are." His eyes traveled over her like a ledger. "A wife," he said. "A woman whose worth is measured in heirs. You are not the law. You are not the land. You are not God." He leaned in close enough that Eliza could smell the brandy on his breath. "You will give me an heir," he whispered, "one way or another." Then he turned and extinguished the lamp with a violent twist, as if he wanted darkness to swallow her answer. Eliza stood alone in the black, her hands clenched at her sides. In the silence, she heard the distant low hum of the quarters, someone singing softly, a lullaby meant for a child who might not live to see sunlight. Eliza's throat tightened. She thought with a sharp clarity that surprised her, "If I do nothing, Silas will destroy someone far weaker than me." She thought, "And if Gideon takes this plantation, he will destroy everyone." She went to the window and looked out over the moonlit fields. The cane rows lay like dark ribs across the earth. Farther off, the slave cabins dotted the edge of the woods like small wounds. And in that moment, Eliza Hardwick made a decision so scandalous it would have split the county in half if anyone had known. If Silas wanted an heir badly enough to buy a woman and break her, then Eliza would give him an heir he could not control, not from his blood, from the blood he believed he owned. She didn't speak it out loud. Speaking it would make it a sin she could not take back, but she let it settle into her bones like a vow. If a child must be born into this house, then it will be a child that ends it. The next morning, Eliza walked the plantation with the steady steps of a woman going to inspect linen and ledgers. She wore a pale blue dress, modest and proper, and carried a basket of folded cloth as if she were headed to the seamstress cabin. The sun was already sharp, and sweat gathered at the base of her throat beneath her collar. The overseer, Mr. Dobbins, tipped his hat to her with exaggerated politeness. He was the kind of man who enjoyed power the way some men enjoyed music, constantly, thoughtlessly. "Mornin', Mis' Hardwick," he drawled. Eliza nodded. "Morning, Mr. Dobbins." His eyes flicked to her basket. "Need something mended?" "Elbows on my husband's coat," she lied smoothly, "and a few linens." Dobbins smirked as if he knew more about husbands than elbows. "I'll let the seamstress know." Eliza continued toward the quarters, the basket heavy in her arms. She passed women bent over washtubs, their hands red from lye. She passed a line of children carrying water buckets too big for their thin arms. She passed old men sitting in the shade, their eyes dull with exhaustion. And she watched, listening, letting her ears collect truth the way a spider collects vibration. A woman whispered, "They say the master's going to buy a girl down in Savannah." Another murmured, "They say he's tired of waiting." A third spat into the dirt, "Ain't nothing new in that." Eliza's grip tightened on the basket handle until her knuckles went white. At the far edge of the quarters, near a shed where tools were kept, a group of men worked on repairing a broken wagon wheel. Their shirts were dark with sweat, and their muscles flexed with each lift of the axle. One man stood apart from the rest, his hands on the wheel, his posture calm, almost controlled. He had a wide chest and shoulders like carved wood. His skin glistened under the sun, and his forearms were corded with strength. When he lifted the wheel, it looked effortless, like he was picking up something that weighed no more than a chair. Dobbins's voice floated behind Eliza, boasting to another white man who'd come to visit. "See that one?" Dobbins said. "Isaiah, strongest buck I got, could pull a plow by himself if I let him," the visitor laughed. "Strong enough to break your whip?" Dobbins snorted. "He knows better. He's got a woman, got a boy. He ain't stupid." Isaiah's head lifted slightly at the sound of his own name. His eyes were dark, steady, and when they turned, they landed on Eliza. For half a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Eliza felt, very suddenly, the weight of what she was considering. Isaiah's gaze did not drop. It didn't flicker away in fear or false deference. It held hers like a hand on a door that could be opened or slammed shut. Then he looked back down at the wheel and continued working. Eliza turned away before her face could betray her. She walked to the seamstress cabin and spoke with the old woman who mended clothing, her voice gentle, her words ordinary. She left cloth and collected finished hems. She smiled at a child. She nodded at a woman nursing a baby. All the while, her mind ran like a river under ice. Isaiah, strongest, a man with a wife and child, a man with something to lose, a man Silas saw as livestock. Eliza returned to the big house and found Silas in his study, a glass of brandy already poured, though it wasn't yet noon. He didn't look up when she entered. He was reading Gideon's latest letter. Eliza stood in the doorway until Silas finally noticed her. "What?" he said, already irritated. "Do you need?" Eliza stepped in and closed the door behind her. "I want to talk," she said. Silas's eyebrows rose. "Now you want to talk." Eliza's voice remained even. "About the heir." Silas leaned back in his chair, the letter crinkling in his hand. "Finally. Have you come to your senses?" Eliza walked closer, her skirt whispering against the rug. "I have," she said. Silas's eyes sharpened. "Good." Eliza met his gaze and let her face soften in the way women were trained to soften it when men needed to feel powerful. "I will give you what you want," she said, "but not the way you plan." Silas's mouth curled. "You're finally ready to do your duty?" Eliza didn't answer that directly. She moved around his desk and placed her hands lightly on the wood near his glass, careful not to touch it. "Dr. Pritchard said there may be an obstruction," she murmured. Silas's jaw clenched. "Yes." Eliza lowered her voice. "If the county learns you cannot father a child, Silas, Gideon will not only take the plantation, he will take your name. He will make you a joke." Silas's nostrils flared. "Do not say it." Eliza leaned closer. "Then we must be clever." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Eliza let a small pause hang like the breath before a confession. "We will produce an heir," she said, "and no one will question it." Silas stared at her. "How?" Eliza's fingers tightened on the desk edge. She forced herself to keep her voice low, calm, practical. "We choose the father," she said, quietly, carefully. Silas blinked once, slow. You mean another man?" Eliza watched his face shift through disbelief, anger, and then something darker, something calculating. "You're offering me—" "What?" he whispered. "I'm offering you survival," Eliza said. Silas's hand tightened around the letter. "You would dishonor me." "I would save you," Eliza corrected. Silas stood abruptly, chair scraping. "No." Eliza didn't flinch. "You said you would purchase a breeding woman." Silas's face reddened. "That is different." "How?" Eliza asked quietly. "Is it different?" Silas's eyes flashed. "Because I am the master." Eliza's heart pounded, but she kept her expression steady. "And I am your wife," she said. "We both know what Gideon will do if you die without a child. He will strip me of every inch of dignity you've left me. He will sell your people. He will tear this place apart." Silas's breathing quickened. Eliza pressed on, her voice a careful blade. "You have a choice," she said. "Buy a girl and force her, and hope the child is strong enough to survive, and then spend your life watching that child as a reminder of your shame. Or let me handle it, discreetly, and you get what you want. An heir that no one questions." Silas stared at her with a mixture of horror and fascination. "You're mad," he whispered. Eliza tilted her head. "Am I? Or am I the only one thinking like Gideon?" Silas's lips parted slightly. Eliza let the next sentence fall as softly as silk. It doesn't have to be another white man, she said. Silas's eyes widened. No. Eliza held his gaze. A slave. The room went silent except for the ticking clock, steady as a heartbeat. Silas's face twisted as if he'd swallowed something foul. You would put, he choked on the word, you would put that inside you? Eliza's stomach lurched at the ugliness in his tone, but she forced her voice to stay steady. Silas, she said, you don't have to touch me. You don't have to know how it happens. All you have to do is claim what results from it. Silas stepped back as if she'd struck him. A half-breed heir, he spat. A scandal. Eliza's voice sharpened for the first time. Only if you let it be. Silas's gaze flicked to the window, to the fields beyond, as if the plantation itself might speak. People will know, he said, weaker now. Eliza shook her head. They know what you do to women you buy. They know what you do in the quarters. They just pretend not to, because it keeps their own sins comfortable. Silas swallowed. Eliza leaned forward slightly. Choose the father wisely, she whispered. Choose someone no one would suspect because you control him. Someone strong enough that the child is strong. Someone you can sell or kill if you must. The words tasted bitter coming out of her mouth. Silas stared at her, and in his eyes, Eliza saw the truth. He was already considering it, not as a moral horror, but as a strategy. He sank back into his chair slowly. A slave, he murmured. If the child is light enough, if the child looks like... Eliza's nails dug into her palm. She hated him in that moment, hated what desperation turned him into, hated what this house had always been. She swallowed her own disgust. I can arrange it, she said. Silas's voice was barely audible. Who? Eliza thought of Isaiah's steady eyes, his wife, his child, his quiet strength. She said the name anyway. Isaiah. Silas blinked. The field hand? The strongest, Eliza said. Silas's mouth tightened. You know him? I've seen him work, Eliza lied. That is all. Silas stared at the desk, his jaw working. And then, in a voice like someone signing a death warrant, he said, Do it. Eliza felt the room tilt slightly, as if the house itself had shifted on its foundation. She turned to leave. Silas's voice stopped her. Eliza, he said. She looked back. His eyes were hard again, the hardness of a man who thought cruelty was control. If you betray me, he said, I will bury you in this land. Eliza held his gaze. If you fail, she replied, Gideon will bury you first. That night, Eliza did not sleep. She sat in her sitting room with a lamp turned low and a piece of paper on her lap, writing a letter she could not send. She wrote to her father, long dead, asking if he'd known this would be her life when he handed her over like property with a dowry attached. She wrote to God, asking why a woman's body was always the battlefield for men's wars. She wrote to herself, reminding herself of what she intended. Not romance, not sin for pleasure, but a weapon against a system that fed on the weak. When the lamp oil burned low, she folded the paper and fed it into the fire. Then she stood and went to the kitchen door, where the old housekeeper, Miss May, waited in the shadows. Miss May was enslaved, but she moved through the big house like a ghost that knew all its secret passages. Her hair was silver, her back bent, and her eyes missed nothing. Miss May looked at Eliza and said, without any surprise, You finally ready to do something dangerous? Eliza's throat tightened. I need help. Miss May's gaze sharpened. With what kind of help? Eliza's voice shook despite her effort. With Isaiah. Miss May did not gasp. She did not recoil. She just stared at Eliza as if weighing her. You don't say that name like a woman asking for sugar, Miss May murmured. You say it like a woman asking for blood. Eliza swallowed. I need to speak to him. Miss May's lips pressed together. And he need to have the choice to say no. Eliza's eyes flicked away. The word choice sat heavy between them, because they all knew how thin that word was on this land. Miss May stepped closer, her voice low. If you use him, she said, you'll be no better than the men you hate. Eliza lifted her chin. Then tell me how to do it without becoming them. Miss May studied her for a long moment, then turned toward the back hall. Come, she said. They moved through the house quietly, down a corridor that led to a small storage room behind the pantry. Miss May opened a loose board in the wall, revealing a narrow space where she kept things the master didn't know existed, her own hidden world. Inside were small bundles, herbs, papers, a tiny tin of ink, and a worn Bible with pages marked in charcoal. Miss May pulled out a folded scrap of paper and handed it to Eliza. "What is this?" Eliza whispered. "A message," Miss May said, "for Isaiah." Eliza unfolded it with trembling fingers. The words were neat, careful, and unmistakably written by someone who could read and write far better than any enslaved person was allowed to. "Meet at the old smokehouse after midnight. Come alone. Bring your courage." Eliza looked up sharply. Miss May's eyes held hers. "He ain't just strong," she said. "He's smart, he quiet, and he got a heart that still work even when this place try to crush it." Eliza's throat tightened. "You're helping him," she realized. Miss May shrugged slightly. "I help who I can." Eliza stared at the note. "He can write," Miss May's voice was a whisper, "and he can hang for it." Eliza felt cold all over. She thought, if Silas knew. Miss May stepped closer. "You asked for help," she said, "so listen careful. You don't summon Isaiah like he your dog. You speak plain. You offer something real, and you understand, whatever you think you doing. He the one paying for it with his skin." Eliza swallowed hard. "I understand." Miss May's eyes narrowed. "Do you?" Eliza looked back down at the note, then folded it carefully. "I will," she said, and she meant it like a vow. After midnight, the plantation was a different creature. The air cooled and thickened, and the sounds changed. Crickets screamed in the grass, an owl called from the live oaks. The house itself creaked as if it were restless. Eliza slipped out through the back door wearing a dark shawl over her nightdress. Miss May had given her a lantern with the wick turned low. Eliza walked with her heart hammering, her feet careful on the dirt path that led past the kitchen garden and toward the old smokehouse, a weathered building that hadn't been used in years, its door hanging crooked. She reached it and hesitated, her breath coming too fast. Then she heard footsteps. Isaiah emerged from the darkness like a shadow that had decided to become a man. He stopped a few feet away, keeping distance as if it were a shield. The lantern light caught his face, high cheekbones, a straight nose, a mouth set in a line that looked carved rather than softened. His eyes were dark and steady. "Eliza Hardwick," he said quietly. Hearing her name in his voice felt strange, like a bell ringing in an empty church. "You can call me Mrs. Hardwick," Eliza said automatically, then hated herself for it. Isaiah's gaze did not change. "That what you want," he said, "or that what you trained to say?" Eliza swallowed. "Eliza," she said. Isaiah nodded once as if acknowledging a risk taken. "What you want with me?" he asked, "at this hour?" Eliza's mouth went dry. All her careful rehearsed words vanished. She forced herself to speak plainly. "Silas wants an heir," she said. He can't make one." Isaiah's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing. Eliza's voice shook. "He planned to buy a girl, to force her. I stopped him." Isaiah's jaw flexed. A muscle jumped in his cheek. "And now you here," he said, "because you got another plan." Eliza's throat tightened. "Yes." Isaiah waited, his silence heavy. Eliza inhaled, then said the sentence that had been burning in her for days. "I want you to be the father of my child." The night seemed to go still. Even the crickets sounded quieter, as if the world itself leaned in. Isaiah stared at her, and the calm in his eyes cracked, not into fear, but into something like fury held in a tight fist. "You say that," he murmured, "like it a choice." Eliza's hands clenched beneath her shawl. "I don't—" Isaiah took one step closer, not threatening, but intense. "You think I don't know what that mean," he said softly. "You think I don't know what folks whisper about in the quarters? White men doing what they want with women and calling it nature. Overseers taking what they please and calling it discipline." His voice sharpened. "You think I don't know what it mean when a person with power asks for something from a person without it?" Eliza's eyes stung. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I'm asking you here, in the dark, without the overseer, without my husband. That's why I'm telling you the truth. I don't want to be them." Isaiah stared at her. "But you still standing in their house?" Eliza's breath trembled. "Yes." Isaiah's eyes flicked briefly toward the big house in the distance, its windows dark, its shape hulking. "Why me?" he asked. Eliza's throat tightened. "Because you're strong." Isaiah's mouth twitched, not in humor. "That what you see?" Eliza swallowed. "Because you have a wife and child," she added quickly, "and you understand what it means to protect someone." Isaiah's gaze hardened. "Don't you bring my family into your mouth like a prayer?" Eliza flinched. Isaiah's voice dropped. "You want a child that looked like him?" He nodded toward the big house. "You want to fool the county. You want to keep your land." Eliza's heart pounded. "I want to keep it from Gideon." Isaiah's eyes narrowed. "Who Gideon?" Eliza hesitated, then realized how little Isaiah could know of white family politics, despite how much it controlled his life. "My husband's cousin," she said. "If Silas dies without an heir, Gideon takes everything, and he will sell people. He will break families." Isaiah's jaw tightened. He didn't need more explanation than that. "And you think a baby fixed that?" he said. Eliza's voice shook. "A baby gives me time. It gives me leverage. It gives me a chance to move pieces before Gideon can." Isaiah stared at her for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly. "What you offer?" Eliza blinked. "What?" Isaiah's eyes were steady. "You ask me to give you the most dangerous thing a slave man can give," he said. "If folks find out, they don't just whip me. They kill me slow. They sell my wife. They sell my boy. They make an example." He stepped closer, just within the lantern's reach. "So tell me what you offer." Eliza's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to demand terms. Part of her felt ashamed that she hadn't expected it. She forced herself to answer. "I offer you freedom," she whispered. "For you, your wife, and your child." Isaiah's eyes flickered. Just once, like a match struck in darkness. Eliza hurried on, afraid he'd think it was a lie. "My father left me funds," she said. "Not all of it is under Silas's control. I can arrange papers. I can pay someone. I can send you north. I can—" Isaiah held up a hand, stopping her. "You can," he repeated softly, tasting the word. "Can." Eliza's face flushed with desperation. "I will," she said. "I swear it." Isaiah stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice low and deadly calm. "You swear it like you ain't never broke a promise before." Eliza's throat tightened. "I've never made one like this." Isaiah's gaze held hers. "And what about your husband?" he asked. "He know you asking me?" Eliza hesitated. "He knows the plan." Isaiah's eyes narrowed. "So the master given permission." Eliza swallowed. "Yes." Isaiah's mouth tightened. "That don't make it better." Eliza's voice cracked. "I know." Silence again. The lantern hissed softly. Isaiah's gaze dropped briefly to Eliza's hands, trembling under the shawl. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "My wife," he said. "Her name's Ruth." Eliza nodded. She'd seen Ruth once, a woman with tired eyes and a spine that still stood straight. "And my boy," Isaiah continued. "His name's Caleb. He ate." Eliza swallowed. "Yes." Isaiah looked at her hard. "If you lie," he said, "you don't just ruin me. You ruin them." Eliza felt tears threaten, but she forced them back. "I won't," she whispered. Isaiah stared for a long moment, then turned his head slightly as if listening to something far away. When he looked back, his eyes were steady again. "There ain't no clean way to do dirty things," he said softly. Eliza's breath trembled. "I know." Isaiah's jaw clenched. "But if what you say about Gideon true," he murmured, "then that baby might be a door." Eliza's heart pounded. Isaiah's eyes held hers. "You get me and mine out," he said. "Not later, not someday. You start now." Eliza nodded quickly. "Yes." Isaiah's voice hardened. "And you don't touch me like you own me. You don't call this love. You don't call this sin like it just between you and God. You call it what it is." Eliza swallowed hard. "What is it?" she whispered. Isaiah's eyes were dark. "A bargain," he said. "A risk. And a knife held to my throat." Eliza's stomach twisted, but she nodded. Isaiah took a step back. "Tell Miss May," he said. "She know how to move messages. She know who can make paper appear. You want this done? You do it quiet." Eliza's voice was barely audible. "And will you—" Isaiah's gaze sharpened. "Don't ask me to say it gentle." Eliza closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she forced herself to be direct because anything else would be cruelty disguised as politeness. "Will you do it?" she whispered. Isaiah held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "Yes." Not with warmth, not with romance, with the grim calm of a man stepping into fire to pull his family out. Eliza felt her knees go weak. Isaiah turned away, his shape melting back into the darkness. Before he disappeared, he paused and looked back once. "If you ever forget what this cost," he said, "I'll remind you." Then he was gone, leaving Eliza alone with the lantern and the weight of the most dangerous promise she'd ever made. If you've ever wondered how a single decision can change the fate of an entire house, keep listening, because what Eliza did next wasn't just scandal. It was war, fought with whispers, ink, and a child no one was supposed to question. And if you want more stories where the powerful set a trap and end up caught in it, tap like and stay with me, because the trap hadn't even sprung yet. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in pretending. Eliza took breakfast with Silas and laughed at his jokes. She hosted tea for the preacher's wife and spoke warmly about God's blessings. She walked the gardens and complimented the roses. Silas, for his part, began to swagger again. He took longer rides. He drank less in the mornings. He started speaking casually in front of guests about the future Hardwick heir. It was as if the mere idea of a son had restored his spine. Eliza watched him with a kind of cold fascination. Men like Silas could be resurrected by lies. But Eliza's lie was not meant to keep him alive. It was meant to give her time. Miss May became Eliza's shadow, slipping in and out of rooms with trays and linens, carrying more than food and cloth. Sometimes she carried folded scraps of paper tucked beneath the tray. Sometimes she carried herbs meant to control cycles, to sharpen the narrow window of possibility with cruel precision. Eliza never said Isaiah's name out loud in the big house again. She didn't have to. Sometimes she'd find a small mark, chalk on the back step, a twig placed at an angle on the path, that told her Isaiah had received a message. That told her he was ready, or waiting, or warning her to pause. Eliza began keeping a second ledger, hidden behind a loose brick in the fireplace surround. In it, she recorded not cotton yields, but names, debts, favors, the quiet economy of secrets. She learned who among the white men drank too much and talked too loose, who among the merchants carried guilt like a coin that could be spent, who among the county clerks had a gambling habit. Eliza also learned something else. Silas wasn't just desperate, he was paranoid. One afternoon, Eliza returned to the big house and found Silas standing in the hallway outside her bedroom, his face pale. "What is it?" she asked quickly. Silas's eyes darted to the open door behind him. "Someone's been in your room." Eliza's blood turned to ice. "What?" Silas grabbed her arm and pulled her inside. Her jewelry box was open, her drawers half pulled out. Her vanity chair tipped slightly as if someone had moved too fast. Eliza's heartbeat roared in her ears. Silas's voice was sharp. "What are you hiding?" Eliza forced her face into confusion. "Hiding?" Silas's eyes were wild. "Gideon," he hissed. "He's sending someone. He's trying to find something, some proof, some leverage." Eliza's mind raced. The hidden ledger wasn't here. The funds her father left, those papers were in the locked drawer. The loose brick in the fireplace was in the sitting room, not here. But still. Silas strode to her vanity and yanked open the locked drawer with a key. He rifled through papers with shaking hands. Eliza watched, forcing herself not to react, not to look at anything as if it mattered. Silas found nothing he recognized as dangerous, but his face was tight. He turned to her. "If Gideon finds out about my condition," he whispered, "he'll have me declared unfit. He'll take control of everything." Eliza's voice was soft. "Then we must be careful." Silas's eyes narrowed, studying her. "You're calm," he said. Eliza lifted her chin. "Someone has to be." Silas's gaze lingered too long, and Eliza felt a chill. For the first time, she realized Silas might not just fear Gideon, he might fear her. Because Eliza was the one holding the match near the powder. That night, Silas came to her bed with a strange tenderness, stroking her hair the way a man might stroke a horse he depended on. "You'll do it soon," he murmured. "Won't you?" Eliza kept her voice steady. "Soon." Silas exhaled as if relieved, then pressed his lips to her forehead. and Eliza lay still, staring into the dark, thinking of Isaiah's words. A knife held to my throat. 2 nights later, Miss May appeared at Eliza's door with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Eliza," she whispered. Eliza sat up, heart pounding. "What is it?" Miss May's eyes were tight. "Ruth got word," she said. "Dobbin's been watching Isaiah." Eliza's blood ran cold. "Why?" Miss May's jaw clenched. "Because the master been talking too bold. Overseer ain't stupid. He see the master acting like a rooster with no hen." Eliza swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Miss May set the bundle on the bed and unwrapped it. Inside were herbs, a small vial, and a folded paper. "Eliza," Miss May said softly, "you want this done? You do it now, before the overseer decide to sell Isaiah just to keep the master from getting too close to shame." Eliza's throat tightened. She took the folded paper and opened it. "Smokehouse, tomorrow, after the last bell." Eliza's hands trembled. She looked up at Miss May. "If we do this," she whispered, "and it goes wrong." Miss May's eyes were hard. "It already wrong," she said. "You just trying to choose which wrong you can live with." Eliza closed her eyes briefly. Then she nodded. The next evening, after the plantation's last bell signaled the end of work, Eliza waited until Silas was in the study with Brandy and Gideon's letters. She told him she had a headache and would retire early. Silas barely looked up, already lost in his own fear. Eliza moved through the house quietly, down the back stairs, out into the cooling dusk. The smokehouse loomed in the dim light, its wooden boards gray and warped. She stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of old salt and soot. The door creaked behind her. Isaiah stood in the shadows, his shape solid, his presence filling the small space. Eliza's lantern light flickered over his face. His eyes were steady, but his jaw was tight. "You sure?" he asked quietly. Eliza swallowed hard. "No," she admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." Isaiah stared at her for a long moment, then nodded once. He moved closer, not touching her yet, as if giving her one last chance to back away. Eliza's breath shook. She forced herself to speak the words that mattered most. "I have a plan," she whispered, "for your freedom. I've already spoken to a man in Charleston who can—" Isaiah held up a hand. "Talk later," he said softly. "Now, we do what we came to do." Eliza's stomach twisted. She hated that it had to be like this, transactional, dangerous, stripped of tenderness. She hated even more that men like Silas had forced the world into this shape. Isaiah's gaze held hers, and in it, Eliza saw something like mourning. Not for himself, for what they both had been turned into. Eliza lifted her chin, and her voice came out almost inaudible. "Be gentle," she whispered. Isaiah's eyes darkened. "I'll be human," he said. "That the best I can offer in a place built to make monsters." Eliza nodded. The lantern flame trembled as if the air itself held its breath. Eliza would never speak of what happened in that smokehouse as a love story. She would never dress it up with soft words. She would only remember the silence afterward, the way Isaiah stepped back as if distance could keep his soul intact, and the way Eliza pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from sobbing. When she finally left, Isaiah's voice stopped her at the door. "Eliza," he said quietly. She turned. His eyes were steady. "Don't you let that child be a chain," he said. "Don't you let it be born just to keep this house standing. You make it mean something." Eliza's throat tightened. "I will," she whispered. Then she slipped back into the dusk, carrying a secret so heavy it felt like she'd stolen fire. The first sign came 3 weeks later. Eliza woke before dawn with nausea so sharp it made her sit up abruptly, sweat breaking out across her skin. She stumbled to the chamber pot, retching until her throat burned. When she finished, she sat on the edge of the bed, shaking, her mind racing. Silas stirred beside her. "What's wrong?" he mumbled. Eliza forced her voice to sound weak, ordinary. "Something I ate." Silas grunted and rolled over, already half asleep. Eliza stared at the ceiling. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to her stomach. She thought, "If I'm not..." Then she thought, "If I am..." The second sign came when her courses did not arrive. Eliza sat in her sitting room with Miss May, hands clenched around her teacup so tightly her fingers ached. Miss May watched her with sharp eyes. "Well," Miss May murmured finally. It either workin' or you sick. Eliza's voice cracked. What if it doesn't work? Miss May's expression hardened. Then you don't get to give up, she said. You already stepped off the edge. You keep flying or you fall. Eliza swallowed, throat tight. Miss May reached into her apron and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Chew this, she said. It'll settle your stomach. Eliza took it with trembling hands. Miss May leaned closer, her voice low. And you better start acting like a woman expectin', she said. You better start looking like a wife blessed by God. You better start laughing when the preacher's wife asks you how you doin'. Eliza nodded shakily. That afternoon, Eliza visited the garden and let herself be seen. She smiled at the cook. She spoke gently to the housemaid. She leaned on the railing of the gallery porch and gazed out at the fields as if pondering motherhood. Silas watched her from the doorway, suspicious at first. Then his eyes warmed with hope. He crossed the porch and placed a hand on her waist with a possessiveness that made Eliza's skin crawl. You look different, he murmured. Eliza forced a small smile. Do I? Silas's gaze flicked to her stomach as if he could see through cloth. His hand tightened. Eliza, he whispered, tell me. Eliza lowered her eyes in a performance she'd practiced in front of the mirror. It may be too soon, she said softly. But I think... Silas's breath hitched, his face transformed. In that moment, Silas looked like a man who'd been drowning and just felt ground under his feet. He pulled her into him, pressing his forehead to hers. Thank God, he whispered. Thank God. Eliza's hands hovered awkwardly at his shoulders. Silas's voice trembled with emotion that might have been real if it hadn't been built on ownership. My son, he murmured. My heir. Eliza's stomach twisted. She looked past Silas's shoulder out toward the fields. For a moment in the distance she saw Isaiah hauling a load of timber, his muscles moving under his shirt. He looked up briefly. Their eyes met across the space between the big house and the quarters, across the gulf of lies. Isaiah's face was unreadable. Eliza felt tears sting her eyes. Silas drew back and cupped her face. We'll tell the county, he said, voice bright. We'll tell Gideon. We'll tell everyone. Let them choke on it. Eliza forced a smile. Yes, she whispered. And just like that, the scandal began, not with gossip, but with celebration. Silas ordered a feast. He sent Dobbins into town with a wagon full of cotton to sell and instructions to buy sugar, flour, coffee, and whiskey. He invited the preacher and the judge. He even invited Gideon, who arrived 2 days later with a smile too sharp to be friendly. Gideon stepped onto the gallery porch like he owned it already, his boots polished, his coat fine, his eyes cold. Eliza, he said, kissing her hand with a theatrical flourish, you look radiant. Eliza forced politeness. Cousin Gideon. Gideon's gaze slid to her stomach as if he could already see the future inside it. And Silas tells me, Gideon purred, that the Hardwick line is saved. Silas's chest puffed. That's right. Gideon smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. How blessed, Gideon murmured, after so many years. Eliza felt Silas stiffen beside her. Gideon's gaze lingered on Silas, and for a split second, Eliza saw it. Gideon knew something was wrong. Not proof, but instinct. The scent of weakness. Gideon raised his glass at the feast later, his voice smooth. To new life, he said, to sons, and to God's mysterious ways. The guests laughed politely. Eliza felt Isaiah's warning echo in her skull. They kill me slow. Because Gideon was watching, and Gideon did not forgive mystery. That night, after the guests had eaten and drunk and toasted, Eliza retired with Silas to their bedroom. Silas was flushed with whiskey and triumph. He poured himself another drink and grinned at Eliza like a man who believed the world had been forced back into its proper shape. You did it, he said, voice thick. You finally did it. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap. Silas stepped closer, his expression shifting into something hungry, not for her, but for control. And now, he murmured, I get to enjoy what's mine. Eliza's stomach turned. She forced her voice to remain soft. Silas, she said carefully, Dr. Pritchard said. Silas's eyes flashed. Do not bring that man into my room. Eliza swallowed. I'm just saying, I need rest. Silas's jaw tightened. For a moment, Eliza thought he would insist. Then he exhaled sharply and stepped back. "Fine," he snapped. "But remember this, Eliza, that child carries my name, my blood, my legacy." Eliza's throat tightened. Silas leaned down, pressing a kiss to her stomach through the fabric of her nightdress, an almost tender gesture made grotesque by what he believed. "My son," he whispered. Eliza closed her eyes. In the darkness, she heard the distant murmur of the quarters again, the soft rise and fall of voices like waves. She wondered what it would feel like to bring a child into a world built to devour children. The next morning, Eliza woke to the sound of shouting outside. She rushed to the window and looked down into the yard. Dobbins stood near the stable, holding a whip. Two men flanked Isaiah, gripping his arms. Isaiah's face was calm, but his body was rigid. Ruth stood nearby, clutching Caleb, her eyes wide with terror. Silas stormed out of the house, his robe flapping, his face furious. "What is this?" Eliza demanded, rushing out onto the gallery. Silas didn't look up at her. He marched straight toward Isaiah. Dobbins spoke quickly. "Caught him near the smokehouse last night," he said, "after hours." Eliza's blood turned to ice. Silas's eyes narrowed. "Why were you near the smokehouse?" he growled. Isaiah's voice was steady. "Haul in tools," he said. Dobbins sneered. "Haul in tools at midnight." Silas's gaze sharpened, suspicion blooming like poison. Eliza's heart hammered. If Silas connected smokehouse to anything. Gideon emerged from the house behind Eliza, already dressed, his expression curious. "What's this?" Gideon murmured, stepping onto the porch. Silas's jaw clenched. "A slave out of place," he snapped. Gideon's gaze slid to Isaiah, then to Ruth, then back to Eliza. His eyes narrowed slightly as if mapping the scene. Eliza's mouth went dry. Silas stepped closer to Isaiah. "You been sneaking," Silas said, voice low. "You been thinking you can move around this plantation without my say-so." Isaiah's eyes remained calm. "No, sir," he said. Silas's nostrils flared. "Don't you sir me like you got dignity." Eliza descended the stairs quickly, forcing herself into the yard. "Silas," she said sharply, "stop this." Silas turned on her, eyes blazing. "Stay out of it." Eliza stepped closer, her voice low and urgent. "If you make a spectacle, Gideon will remember it," she hissed. "He'll think you're losing control." Silas's jaw clenched. Gideon's voice floated down from the porch. My, he drawled. "Eliza, you've grown protective of the help." Eliza's blood ran cold. Silas glanced up at Gideon, then back at Isaiah. The paranoia in Silas's face sharpened into something dangerous. He lifted his hand. Dobbins raised the whip eagerly, as if hunger lived in his arm. Eliza stepped between Silas and Isaiah. The yard went silent. Silas stared at her, disbelief on his face. "Move," he said. Eliza's voice shook, but she held firm. "No," she said, "not like this." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Why?" he whispered. Eliza forced herself to breathe, because if Isaiah was whipped now, it would not just be punishment, it would be interrogation disguised as discipline. Silas would watch for flinches, for guilt, for any hint of truth. Eliza lifted her chin and made herself sound like the kind of plantation mistress the county expected, cold, practical, concerned with appearances. "He's strong," she said. "He's valuable. If you injure him, you lose labor. And you look unstable." Silas's jaw clenched. Gideon chuckled softly from the porch. "Eliza's right," he called down. "A strong man is worth more unbroken." Eliza felt sick, but she latched onto the opening. "Yes," she said quickly. "Put him back to work, quietly, no spectacle." Silas stared at her. His eyes burned with something, anger, suspicion, and a hint of fear. Then he jerked his chin at Dobbins. "Let him go," Silas snapped. "But watch him." Dobbins looked disappointed, but he released Isaiah. Isaiah stumbled slightly, then regained his balance. His eyes met Eliza's for a brief second. In that glance, Eliza saw warning. Not gratitude. Warning, because the trap was tightening. Gideon descended the porch steps, strolling into the yard as if enjoying a morning walk. He stopped near Ruth, looking her over like a man inspecting a horse. "And who is this?" Gideon murmured. Ruth clutched Caleb tighter. Her face was pale, but her chin lifted. Isaiah's body tensed. "That's Isaiah's woman," Dobbins said. Gideon's gaze slid to Isaiah. "Ah," he purred, "so you've got something worth losing." Isaiah's jaw clenched. Gideon smiled at Eliza. "Such a lively plantation," he said softly. "Full of secrets." Eliza forced her face into calm. "No secrets here," she replied. Gideon's eyes lingered on her stomach again. "We'll see," he murmured. That night, Eliza could not breathe. She sat at her desk with her hidden ledger open, hands shaking as she wrote names. She needed allies, paper, a route. She needed to get Isaiah's family out before the baby came. And she needed to do it without Silas noticing, without Gideon catching scent. Miss May appeared in the doorway, her face grim. "He watched," Miss May whispered. "Eliza," she added, voice low. Gideon watched Isaiah like he was counting his breaths. Eliza's throat tightened. "What do we do?" she whispered. Miss May stepped inside and closed the door. "We move," Miss May said simply. "Fast." 2 days later, Eliza rode into town in the carriage, supposedly to buy fabric and consult with the doctor. In truth, she went to see a man named Mr. Larkin, a clerk who handled shipping manifests at the river docks, and who owed Eliza's father a debt from years before. Mr. Larkin was the kind of man who sweated when he spoke, his collar always damp, his hands always fiddling with something. Eliza met him behind the general store, out of sight. "You shouldn't be here," Larkin whispered, eyes darting. "If Mr. Hardwick finds out—" "Mr. Hardwick doesn't run your conscience," Eliza said quietly. Larkin swallowed. "What do you want?" Eliza's voice was low. "Passage," she said, "for 3. Larkin's eyes widened. "Slaves," he hissed. Eliza held his gaze. "People," she corrected. Larkin's hands trembled. "I can't—" Eliza reached into her reticule and pulled out a small purse of coins. "Your debt," she said. Larkin's eyes flicked to it like a starving man seeing bread. Eliza leaned closer. "And if you refuse," she whispered, "I will mention to your wife that your late-night dock work has a woman attached to it." Larkin's face went pale. "You wouldn't." Eliza's smile was thin. "I already have," she lied. Larkin swallowed hard, then nodded quickly. "When?" he whispered. Eliza's voice was steady. "Before the next full moon," she said. "I'll send word." Larkin nodded, sweating. Eliza turned to leave, her heart pounding. As she stepped back into the street, she saw Gideon across the way, standing outside the barber shop, hands clasped behind his back, watching her. Eliza's blood froze. Gideon smiled slowly and tipped his hat. Eliza forced her face into calm and nodded politely, as if she'd just been buying fabric like any wife. Gideon's eyes glinted. He walked toward her, slow and deliberate. "Eliza," he purred. "Shopping?" Eliza's stomach twisted. "Yes," she lied smoothly, "for the baby." Gideon's gaze slid to her stomach. "Ah," he murmured. "The baby." He leaned closer slightly, lowering his voice. "It's funny," he said softly, "how God answers prayers in mysterious ways." Eliza felt cold all over. Gideon stepped back, smiling. "Give Silas my regards," he said. Then he walked away, leaving Eliza standing in the street with the sun blazing overhead and fear crawling up her spine like ants. That night, Eliza found Silas in the study, drunk and jittery. He waved Gideon's latest letter in the air. "He's circling," Silas slurred. "He's circling like a damn vulture." Eliza forced calm. "Ignore him." Silas laughed bitterly. "Ignore him? He's in my house." Silas slammed the letter down. "He looked at you today," Silas hissed suddenly. "In town, like he owned you." Eliza's breath caught. "What?" Silas's eyes narrowed. "Do you think I don't hear things?" he whispered. "Dobbins has eyes. Gideon has eyes. Everyone has eyes." Eliza's heart pounded. Silas leaned forward, his face close, his breath sour with whiskey. "Tell me," he whispered, "you're doing this right." Eliza forced a soft smile. "I am." Silas stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly as if trying to convince himself. He reached out and grabbed her wrist, squeezing too hard. "If you ruin me," he whispered, "I will ruin you worse." Eliza pulled her hand back, her skin aching. She turned away, nausea rising again. Not from pregnancy, from living inside a cage made of a man's fear. Weeks passed. Eliza's belly began to round. The county ladies began bringing gifts, tiny embroidered caps, quilts, small silver rattles. They cooed and smiled and spoke of blessings, but their eyes were sharp. Because in the South, a woman's body was public property the moment it carried a child. Eliza's appetite faded. Her sleep became shallow. Her dreams became filled with smokehouses and whips and Gideon's smile. And Isaiah began to be watched like prey. Dobbins assigned men to work near him, men who reported, men who listened, men who watched where Isaiah stepped. Ruth grew thinner, her eyes constantly scanning the yard. Caleb stopped playing with other children and stayed close to his mother's skirts. Eliza saw it all, helpless behind the curtains of her own house. One evening, Miss May slipped into Eliza's room with a message. "It's time," Miss May whispered. Eliza's heart pounded. "Tonight?" Miss May nodded. "Larkin got a boat going upriver. 3 spots, but you gotta move quick." Eliza's breath shook. "How do I—" Miss May's eyes hardened. "You don't go," she said. "You can't. You big as a melon. You'd be caught in a mile." Eliza's throat tightened. "Then how—" Miss May grabbed Eliza's hand. "You send Ruth and Caleb," she whispered. "Isaiah going separate." Eliza's stomach dropped. "Separate?" Miss May nodded. "If they all together and get caught, it done. If they split, maybe one part live." Eliza felt tears sting her eyes. "Isaiah won't leave them." Miss May's voice was low. "He will if it keep him alive." Eliza swallowed hard. She stood abruptly, grabbing a shawl. "What are you doing?" Miss May hissed. Eliza's eyes were fierce. "I'm going to them," she whispered. Miss May's eyes widened. "Eliza!" Eliza's voice shook. "I have to," she whispered. "I promised." Eliza slipped out into the night and moved toward the quarters, her belly heavy, her breath tight. When she reached Isaiah's cabin, she knocked softly. Ruth opened the door, a crack, her face tense. When she saw Eliza, Ruth's eyes widened with shock and suspicion. "Eliza Hardwick," Ruth whispered, voice sharp. "What you doing here?" Eliza swallowed hard. "I'm getting you out," she whispered. Ruth stared at her, disbelief and anger flickering. "You think I'm stupid," she hissed. "You think I don't know what folks whisperin'?" Eliza's throat tightened. "Ruth!" Ruth's eyes flashed. "You took something from me," she whispered, voice trembling with rage. "You took my husband into that smokehouse, and you think you can buy me off with freedom?" Eliza flinched like she'd been slapped. Ruth's jaw clenched. "Say it!" Ruth hissed. "Say what you did!" Eliza's voice cracked. "I made a bargain," she whispered, "to stop Silas from buying a girl and forcing her, to stop Gideon from taking everything, to get you out." Ruth's eyes burned. "And Isaiah," she whispered. "He agreed." Eliza nodded, tears slipping free. Ruth's face twisted with grief. Caleb stood behind Ruth, clutching her skirt, eyes wide. Ruth swallowed hard, her shoulders shaking. Then she said, voice like stone, "You better keep your promise." Eliza nodded frantically. "Tonight," she whispered. "You go tonight." Ruth's hands trembled as she gathered a small bundle, cloth, bread, a tin cup. Not much, because enslaved people learned to carry their whole lives in something that could be thrown over a shoulder. Eliza stood there, watching, guilt crushing her chest. Isaiah stepped into the cabin from the back room. When he saw Eliza, his eyes hardened. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured. Eliza swallowed. "I had to tell her myself," she whispered. "I couldn't send a message like it was nothing." Isaiah's jaw clenched. Ruth looked at Isaiah, her eyes wet. "You going with us?" she whispered. Isaiah's face tightened. "No," he said quietly. Ruth's breath hitched. "No?" Isaiah's voice was low. "If I go with you, they'll hunt all 3 of us," he whispered. "If I stay, maybe they chase me and you slip through." Ruth's face crumpled. "Isaiah." Isaiah stepped closer to Ruth and placed his forehead against hers briefly, a gesture so tender it hurt to witness. "I'm coming," he whispered. "Just not with you." Ruth sobbed silently. Isaiah turned to Caleb and knelt, his big hands gentle on the boy's shoulders. "You listen to your mama," Isaiah whispered. "You be strong. You remember what I taught you." Caleb's lip trembled. "You comin'," he whispered. Isaiah's eyes glistened. "Yes," he lied softly. "Soon." Eliza felt her heart break. Isaiah rose and looked at Eliza. His voice was low, dangerous. "If they catch Ruth," he whispered, "I will burn this place to ash." Eliza swallowed hard. "They won't," she whispered. "I won't let them." Isaiah's eyes held hers. "You already let a lot," he murmured. Eliza flinched, then Isaiah stepped back and opened the door wider. "Go," he said to Ruth, voice tight. "Now." Ruth clutched the bundle, grabbed Caleb's hand, and slipped into the night. Eliza watched them disappear, her chest aching. Isaiah turned to Eliza, his face hard. "You go back," he whispered. "You go back and you play your part." Eliza's throat tightened. "And you?" Isaiah's eyes were dark. "I'll play mine," he murmured. Eliza turned and walked back to the big house with tears on her cheeks, her belly heavy, her soul heavier. Before dawn, the plantation erupted, a shout, then another, then the pounding of boots. Eliza jolted awake to Silas slamming her bedroom door open. "They're gone!" he roared. "Two of 'em gone, Isaiah's woman and boy." Eliza's blood ran cold, but she forced her face into shock. "Gone!" she gasped. Silas's eyes were wild. "Dobbins found the cabin empty, empty." He grabbed Eliza's shoulders, shaking her. "Do you know what this means?" Eliza forced trembling. "No, Silas." Silas's face twisted. "It means Isaiah's been plotting," he snarled. "It means someone helped them." Eliza's heart pounded. Silas turned and stormed out of the room, shouting orders. Eliza sat up, shaking, listening to the chaos below. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats, men riding out, hunting. Eliza's stomach twisted. She pressed her hands to her belly, whispering silently, "Run, run, run." Hours later, Dobbins returned with Isaiah in chains. Eliza stood on the gallery porch, breath shallow. Isaiah's shirt was torn. Blood ran down his temple. His face was bruised, but his eyes were steady. Silas marched up to him, his face twisted with fury. "You," Silas hissed, "you did this." Isaiah's voice was calm. "Yes, sir," he said. Silas blinked, thrown off by the easy confession. "You admit it," Silas spat. Isaiah's eyes held Silas's. "I admit I want my family free," he said quietly. The yard went silent. Even Dobbins looked uneasy, as if Isaiah's honesty made the cruelty uglier. Silas's face reddened. "Where are they?" he roared. Isaiah didn't answer. Silas grabbed Isaiah's chin, forcing his face up. "Where are they?" he hissed, spittle flying. Isaiah's voice was steady. "Somewhere you can't reach," he murmured. Silas's eyes narrowed, suspicion twisting. He glanced up at Eliza on the porch. For a split second, Eliza thought Silas understood everything. She felt faint. Silas's gaze snapped back to Isaiah, and something colder than fury settled in his face. "Take him to the barn," Silas said quietly, "and make him talk." Eliza's knees went weak. Miss May stood behind Eliza on the porch, her face like stone. Eliza whispered, barely moving her lips. "No." Miss May's voice was a breath. "You can't stop it now," she whispered. "You just gotta survive it." Eliza watched Isaiah dragged away, chains clinking, blood dripping. Isaiah turned his head once and looked up at Eliza. Not pleading, not begging, warning, because the bargain had reached its price. Eliza stumbled back into the house, nausea crashing over her. She ran to the washroom and vomited until she shook. Then she stared at herself in the mirror, pale, eyes wild. She whispered, "What have I done?" Behind her, the house was filled with the sounds of men, boots, shouting, the crack of a whip in the distance like a gunshot. Eliza pressed her hand to her stomach and whispered, "I'm sorry." She didn't know who she was apologizing to anymore, Isaiah, Ruth, the unborn child, or the part of herself that had believed she could do something clean inside something rotten. That afternoon, Gideon arrived at the barn. Eliza watched from the window as he dismounted his horse, calm as a man going to inspect crops. He walked inside. Minutes later, Isaiah's scream tore through the air. Eliza's entire body jolted. She clutched the window frame, breath shaking. Another scream. Then silence. Then Gideon emerged, wiping his hands with a cloth as if he'd merely gotten dirt on them. He smiled up at the house, directly at Eliza's window, as if he knew she was watching. Eliza stumbled back, heart pounding. Gideon mounted his horse and rode away, whistling softly. Eliza sank to the floor. Miss May appeared in the doorway, her eyes wet but furious. "He ain't asking questions," Miss May whispered. "He making statements." Eliza's throat tightened. "They'll kill him," she whispered. Miss May's jaw clenched. "Not if he got something they need," she murmured. Eliza's hands trembled. What could they need? Miss May's eyes locked onto Eliza's belly. Eliza felt ice pour through her veins, because suddenly she understood what Gideon had been hunting for all along. Not Ruth, not Caleb. Proof. A reason to tear the house apart. A reason to take everything. Eliza's breath shook. She whispered, "He knows." Miss May's voice was low. "He suspect," she corrected. "And he gonna turn suspicion into truth if you don't move faster than him." Eliza's mind raced, panic sharpening into focus. She couldn't save Isaiah with force. She had no army, no power in that way. But she had something else. Paper, reputation, and the one thing men like Silas feared more than sin: public shame. That night, Eliza went to Silas's study. She found him hunched over his desk, drunk, his face hollow. He looked up when she entered, eyes bloodshot. "What?" he snapped. Eliza closed the door behind her. "I'm going to have the baby at my cousin's house in Charleston," she said. Silas blinked. "What?" Eliza's voice was calm, firm. "The county is full of gossip. Gideon is here. Dobbins is whispering. I want privacy. I want safety." Silas's eyes narrowed. "No." Eliza stepped closer. "Silas," she said quietly, "if Gideon suspects anything about this child, he will destroy you." Silas's face twisted. "He suspects because you're meddling," he spat. "Because you're always—" Eliza cut him off, her voice low and sharp. "Then let me protect you," she said. "Send me away. Keep me out of Gideon's reach." Silas stared at her, breathing hard. Eliza leaned closer, lowering her voice like a prayer. "If I stay here," she whispered, "and Gideon keeps watching, you might lose everything. If I go, he loses his target." Silas's jaw clenched. His eyes flicked to the door, as if Gideon might be listening through it. Silas swallowed. He hated being told what to do, but he loved survival more. Finally he nodded, abrupt. "Fine," he snapped. "Go." Eliza's heart pounded. Silas pointed a shaking finger. "But you come back with a son," he hissed. "You come back with my heir, or don't come back at all." Eliza nodded slowly. "Understood." She turned to leave, then paused. "And Isaiah," she said softly. Silas's eyes narrowed. "What about him?" Eliza forced her face into cold practicality. "If you kill him now," she said, "Gideon will think you killed him to hide something." Silas blinked. Eliza pressed on. "Sell him," she said. "Send him away, quietly. Remove the problem without making blood." Silas stared at her. A flicker of relief crossed his face, because selling Isaiah would feel like control without the mess. "Yes," Silas murmured. "Yes, I'll sell him south, far, where no one—" Eliza's stomach twisted, but she nodded as if agreeing. Anything to keep Isaiah alive long enough for Eliza to make her next move. Eliza left the study with her heart pounding. Miss May waited in the hallway, eyes sharp. "What you do?" Miss May whispered. Eliza's voice shook. "I bought time," she whispered, "and I may have just condemned Isaiah to another hell." Miss May's jaw clenched. "Better than a grave," she murmured. "Now we move." The next morning, Eliza packed. She told the household she needed Charleston's better doctor. She told the county ladies she wanted her cousin's care. She played the part of a nervous, expectant mother perfectly. Silas arranged the carriage. Gideon smiled and offered to escort her. Eliza smiled back and declined sweetly, saying her cousin's husband would meet her halfway. Gideon's eyes narrowed, but he didn't press. As Eliza climbed into the carriage, she glanced toward the barn. She saw Isaiah, shackled, being loaded onto a wagon with 2 other chained men, sold south, like cargo. Isaiah's face was bruised, his eyes were dark. But when he saw Eliza, he lifted his chin slightly, as if reminding her, "You promised." Eliza's throat tightened. The wagon rolled away. Eliza climbed into the carriage and left Hardwick Plantation behind, her heart splitting in 2, one part carrying a child, the other carrying a debt of blood. In Charleston, Eliza moved like a woman possessed. Her cousin Lavinia was kind but naive, thrilled by the scandal of Eliza's visit and the prospect of a baby. Eliza smiled and accepted the attention, but she didn't let Lavinia get too close. Eliza met with lawyers, clerks, a discreet midwife, a man who handled forged papers like bread. She used her father's hidden funds and her own reputation as currency. She discovered something crucial in the process, something that made her hands shake as she read it. Gideon's claim to the plantation wasn't airtight. There was an old clause in her father's deed, a clause that gave Eliza power if she produced an heir, but not necessarily Silas's heir. The law was obsessed with legitimacy, but it was also obsessed with paperwork. If Eliza could prove the child was born within her marriage, the child would inherit. Silas would keep his name. Gideon would be blocked. But if Eliza could also secure a private trust, funds and property arranged outside Silas's control, she could create a future that didn't involve Hardwick Plantation at all. A future where Ruth and Caleb could live free. A future where Isaiah could disappear and start again. Eliza worked with an attorney named Mr. Heir, an older man with tired eyes who didn't ask too many questions as long as he was paid well. "You understand," Heir said quietly, "that what you're doing is precarious." Eliza's voice was steady. "I understand that men built a world that kills people quietly," she replied. "I'm simply trying to build a corner of it where someone can breathe." Heir studied her, then nodded slowly. "Very well," he murmured. "We'll draft it." Eliza signed papers until her hand cramped. She sent money north through Larkin. She sent messages through Miss May's network. She moved pieces like chess, her belly growing, her patience thinning. Then, one evening, a letter arrived. No seal, no signature, just folded paper with neat handwriting. Eliza's hands trembled as she opened it. "He sold me downriver. I got away. Ruth and Caleb safe. But Gideon knows." Eliza's breath hitched. "He's coming to Charleston. He wants to see the baby. He wants proof." Eliza's blood turned to ice. She stared at the letter, her heart pounding. Isaiah was free, at least for the moment. Ruth and Caleb were safe, but Gideon was moving, and Gideon didn't move unless he smelled blood. Eliza's hands trembled as she folded the letter. She whispered to herself, "Then I will give him a spectacle he can't survive." Because if Gideon wanted proof, Eliza would give him something far more dangerous than proof. She would give him public truth, not about the baby's father, but about Gideon's own corruption. Eliza's cousin Lavinia hosted a small gathering a week later, tea and cake, local ladies, a few men of standing, including, unfortunately, Gideon Hardwick. He arrived in Charleston dressed impeccably, smiling like a saint, eyes like a predator. "Eliza," he purred, kissing her hand, "how lovely to see you in civilization." Eliza smiled sweetly. "Cousin Gideon." Gideon's gaze slid to her belly, now unmistakably swollen. "And there," Gideon murmured, "is the future." Eliza's smile didn't falter. She had planned this. The gathering included a judge, Judge Wainwright, who handled estate matters and prided himself on morality. It included a preacher. It included a banker who held Gideon's debts, though he didn't know Eliza knew. Eliza had invited them all with careful intent. As tea was poured, Gideon spoke loudly enough for the room to hear. "It warms my heart," he said, "to see Silas finally blessed." A few ladies nodded approvingly. Eliza set her cup down. "It warms mine as well," she said, voice calm, "to see the county so interested in my womb." A few awkward laughs. Gideon's smile tightened. Eliza leaned back slightly and looked at Judge Wainwright. "Judge," she said sweetly, "you handle estate disputes, do you not?" Wainwright blinked. "Yes, Mrs. Hardwick." Eliza's voice remained soft. "Then perhaps you can answer a question," she said. "If a man seeks to claim land through inheritance, but that man has hidden debts, hidden dealings, and forged signatures, would that affect his claim?" The room went still. Gideon's eyes narrowed. "Eliza," Eliza continued as if Gideon hadn't spoken. "I ask," she said, "because I've come into possession of some papers." She reached into her reticule and pulled out a folded document. It was a copy of a debt note Gideon had signed with the banker, one Gideon had tried to hide by using another man's name. Eliza slid it across the table toward the banker. The banker's eyes widened as he read. His face flushed red. "What is this?" the banker sputtered. Gideon's smile had vanished. Eliza turned to the preacher. "And Reverend," she added softly, "if a man has been stealing from widows, buying up their notes, then threatening them with ruin unless they sign over land, would you call that God's work?" The preacher's mouth fell open. Gideon's eyes burned. "You insolent—" Eliza held up another paper, letters, copied, transcribed by hands in Gideon's employ that Eliza had bought with money and blackmail. Gideon lunged halfway out of his chair. Eliza's voice sharpened, but she kept it polite. "Sit," she said. The command landed like a slap. Gideon froze, shocked by her audacity. Eliza looked around the room, her face pale but steady. "For years," she said, "Gideon has been circling my husband like a vulture. He claims concern for the Hardwick line, but what he wants is land. He wants power. And he's been using debt, threats, and forgery to get it." The room erupted into whispers. Gideon's face was livid. "This is lies," he snapped. Eliza turned to Judge Wainwright. "Judge," she said, voice trembling slightly now, "I want protection. I want my child protected from this man's grasp, and I want an investigation." Wainwright stared at the papers, his face hardening. Gideon's eyes flashed panic for the first time. He looked around the room, realizing he wasn't in the plantation yard anymore. Here, power was shared. Witnesses mattered. Eliza's voice softened, and she delivered the final knife. "And Gideon," she said quietly, "if you want to inspect my baby like it's livestock, you'll do it in a courtroom, in front of everyone." The banker stood abruptly. "Judge," he barked, "I want my money." The preacher's face was pale. This is wickedness." Gideon's mouth opened, but no words came, because Gideon understood something now. Eliza had turned the spotlight on him, and men like Gideon could survive sin, but they could not survive shame. Within days, Gideon found himself cornered by subpoenas, accusations, angry creditors, and a judge whose pride had been insulted by the implication he'd been fooled. Gideon attempted to flee Charleston at dawn. He was stopped at the docks. Eliza heard the news from Mr. Harrow, who arrived at her cousin's house with his hat in his hands, eyes bright with astonishment. "Mrs. Hardwick," he murmured, you've done something quite extraordinary." Eliza's breath shook. "Is he arrested?" Harrow nodded slowly. "Held," he said, "for now, pending inquiry." Eliza sank into a chair, trembling. She had bought herself a window, but windows closed. 2 weeks later, Eliza went into labor. It began at midnight with a pain that made her gasp and grip the bedpost. Lavinia woke and ran for the midwife. Servants lit lamps, the house filled with the rustle of urgency. Eliza labored through the night, sweat soaking her hair, her hands crushing sheets. As dawn broke, she heard the midwife's voice, steady, commanding, like a soldier guiding a battle. "Breathe," the midwife urged. "Now, now!" Eliza screamed, not in delicate ladylike fashion, but in raw animal truth. The pain felt like her body splitting open to reveal all its secrets. She thought of Isaiah's warning, Ruth's rage, Silas's threats, Gideon's smile. She thought, this child better mean something. And then, with one final wrenching push, the baby came. A cry pierced the air, sharp and furious. Eliza sobbed, shaking. The midwife lifted the baby and looked closely, her eyes calculating. Eliza's breath caught. "Tell me," she whispered. The midwife's face softened slightly. "It's a boy," she said. Eliza's body sagged with exhaustion and relief. The boy's skin was lighter than Isaiah's, darker than Silas's. His hair was thick and dark. His features, too new to read clearly, carried a quiet echo of Isaiah's strength. Eliza wept silently, not because the plan had worked, because the plan had created a life, a real one. Lavinia hovered, eyes wide with emotion. "He's beautiful," she whispered. Eliza held her son, trembling. She whispered to him, barely audible, "You're not a weapon, you're not a chain, you're a door." A week later, Silas arrived in Charleston. He burst into Lavinia's parlor with the energy of a man arriving to claim a prize. Eliza sat on the sofa, the baby in her arms, her face pale but steady. Silas's eyes locked onto the child. His breath hitched. "My son," he whispered. He stepped closer, reaching out. Eliza didn't move. Silas's hands trembled as he took the baby carefully, staring down at the tiny face with awe and possessiveness. Then Silas's gaze sharpened. He looked at the baby's skin, the hair, the shape of the lips. Suspicion flickered. Silas's voice went low. "Eliza," he whispered. Eliza held Silas's gaze, her heart pounding. Silas's jaw tightened. "Tell me," he hissed. Eliza's voice was calm. "He is your heir," she said. Silas's eyes narrowed. "That's not what I asked." Eliza leaned forward slightly, her voice low enough that only Silas could hear. I destroyed Gideon, she whispered. He's being investigated. His debts are exposed. He can't touch the plantation. Silas blinked, startled. Eliza's eyes were steady. And I have papers, she continued softly. Legal papers, a trust, a clause from my father's deed. Silas's face tightened. What are you saying? Eliza's voice was like ice. I'm saying, she whispered, that child is protected, not by you, by law. Silas's eyes widened, fury flaring. You! Eliza cut him off, her voice sharp and controlled. If you make a scene, she whispered, Charleston will eat you alive. If you challenge the child's legitimacy, you will publicly admit your obstruction. Silas's face went pale. Eliza leaned closer, her voice almost gentle. You can keep your name, she whispered. You can keep your heir. You can keep the plantation, but you will do as I say. Silas stared at her in disbelief. Eliza's eyes did not blink. Isaiah is gone, she added quietly. Silas's nostrils flared. Where? Eliza's voice was steady. Far, she said, and his wife and child are gone too. Silas's eyes widened. You helped them. Eliza's voice was like stone. Yes. Silas's face twisted with rage. You traitorous! Eliza's gaze sharpened. Say it loudly, she whispered, so Lavinia can hear, so her husband can hear, so Judge Wainwright can hear. Tell them how you planned to buy a girl and force her. Tell them how you chained a man in your barn. Silas froze, breath shallow. Eliza's voice softened, deadly calm. You wanted an heir, she whispered. You have one, and you will raise him under my terms. Silas's hands tightened around the baby. For a moment Eliza thought he might do something unforgivable. Then Silas exhaled shakily and looked down at the baby again. His face changed, because Silas's love was never pure, but it was still love in the only way he knew. Possession. He wanted this child. He wanted his name to continue. He swallowed his rage. What terms? He rasped. Eliza's voice was steady. No more buying people, she said quietly. No more forced breeding schemes, no more Gideon-like games, and you will grant certain freedoms on the plantation, quietly, gradually, in ways the county won't immediately revolt against. Silas's eyes narrowed. You think you can change the world? Eliza's gaze held his. I think I can change my house, she replied. Silas swallowed hard, then nodded stiffly. Eliza reached out and took her son back into her arms. She held him close and whispered, You will not be raised to become them. Silas stared at her, hatred and fear and grudging respect twisting together. Let's go home, Silas muttered finally. Eliza nodded. But home would never be what it once was. Back at Hardwick Plantation, whispers followed them like gnats. The baby's birth was celebrated loudly, but questions lived under every compliment. Some women smiled too hard. Some men looked too long. Silas paraded the child on the gallery, forcing the county to clap and cheer, daring them to doubt him. Eliza watched from behind, her face calm, her mind sharp. She knew suspicion would always exist. That was the cost. But suspicion was not proof. And Eliza had built a fortress of paperwork around that child's legitimacy. Gideon, meanwhile, was disgraced. His investigation dragged on. His creditors gutted him. He retreated to a smaller property, his power shrinking like a shadow at noon. But Gideon did not forget. One autumn evening, months later, Eliza received a letter. No signature, just one line. I know whose blood runs in that child. Eliza's hands trembled as she folded the paper. She walked to the window and looked out over the fields. She saw new fences being built, new rules being quietly enforced. Miss May moving through the yard like a general, fewer whippings, more food distributed, small changes, fragile as glass. She also saw Dobbins watching, resentful, and she knew the war wasn't over, because men like Gideon didn't need proof to strike. They needed opportunity. That opportunity came on the night the barn burned. It started as a faint glow against the sky, then became a roar. Eliza bolted upright in bed, heart pounding. The baby cried. Silas stumbled out of bed shouting. They ran outside to see flames licking the roof of the barn, sparks flying into the night like angry insects. Men shouted, hauling buckets. Women screamed. Horses whinnied in terror. Eliza stood on the porch clutching her child, smoke stinging her eyes. Silas roared orders, his face red with fury and fear. Then Eliza saw it. A figure near the edge of the yard, slipping away into the darkness, tall, lean, familiar. Gideon. Eliza's blood turned to ice. He had come back, not with papers, not with law, but with fire. Eliza's mind sharpened. She turned to Miss May, who stood beside her, eyes hard. "Get the baby inside," Eliza whispered. Miss May nodded, taking the child. Eliza descended the porch steps and moved through the chaos toward Silas. Silas turned on her. "Stay back," he snapped. "This is—" Eliza grabbed Silas's arm hard. "Gideon did this," she hissed. Silas blinked, shocked. "What?" Eliza's eyes burned. "I saw him," she whispered. "He's here." Silas's face twisted. "Find him," Eliza hissed. "Now, before he vanishes." Silas's eyes went wild. He shouted to Dobbins and two men. "Go!" he roared. "Find Gideon!" Dobbins hesitated, confused. "Gideon?" Silas's face twisted. "Go!" They ran into the night. Eliza stood there, smoke curling around her, heart pounding. She knew what she had just done. She had aimed Silas's violence at Gideon. She had unleashed two predators on each other, because sometimes the only way to survive monsters was to let them fight. Minutes later, a scream echoed from the tree line. A man's scream, high, furious, then cut short. Silas returned to the yard, his face pale, eyes wide. Eliza stepped closer. "Where is he?" she whispered. Silas's breath shook. "He's gone," he rasped. "But there was blood." Eliza's heart pounded. Silas stared at her, realization dawning. "You saw him," Silas whispered. Eliza's gaze was steady. "Yes." Silas's jaw clenched. "And you told me so I'd—" Eliza cut him off softly. "So you'd protect your heir," she whispered. Silas stared at her for a long moment, then looked away, shaking. The barn continued to burn, collapsing with a groan. The county would talk for years. But Gideon never returned to Hardwick Plantation after that night. Some said he fled south. Some said he died in the woods. Some said he'd been dragged into the swamp by something that didn't forgive. Eliza didn't care what story the county chose. She cared that he was gone. Years passed. The child grew, strong, sharp-eyed, quick with learning. Silas doted on him publicly, proud and possessive. Eliza guided him quietly, teaching him empathy like it was a weapon and restraint like it was power. And one spring morning, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Eliza in careful handwriting. Inside was a simple line. "Ruth and Caleb are in Ohio. They are free. We are building a life. Your debt is paid." Eliza's hands trembled as she held the paper. She went to the window and watched her son running in the yard, laughing, chasing a dog. Silas stood on the porch calling after him, smiling as if the world had finally given him what he deserved. Eliza watched them both, her chest aching with a complicated sorrow. Silas had wanted an heir. He got one. But the heir did not come from Silas's strength. He came from Isaiah's sacrifice. And Eliza's scandalous choice, dangerous, ugly, born in a world built on cruelty, had done what Eliza intended. It had blocked Gideon. It had bought time. It had opened a door for three people to escape. Eliza looked down at the letter again, tears slipping free. She whispered, "Thank you." Not to God, not to Silas. To the man whose strength had never been just muscle. To the man who had stepped into fire so his family could live. Eliza folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her hidden ledger, the ledger of secrets, bargains, and survival. Then she stepped onto the porch and watched her son. Not as a weapon, not as a chain, as a living reminder that even in a world built to crush the weak, someone had dared to gamble everything on a sliver of freedom. And if you stayed with me all the way to the end, you already know why this story refuses to let go. The master thought an heir would keep his power safe, but the wife used that heir to start breaking the very cage they lived in. If you want the next story, where a single scandal turns into a slow-burning reckoning, leave a comment with the word reckoning, and I'll bring you another one that hits just as hard.